Hair Mistakes That Age You Faster, subscriber edition. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, sorry. If you're new, this is a episode of a series where I actually take subscribers who send in their photos on purpose, and they ask me, what is it about my hair that maybe I'm making mistakes with? How can I get a more youthful look? And then I tell them, because I've been doing hair for 26 years, so it's kind of what I do. And I do it outside, hence the plain sound in the background and the view. Yeah, so let's talk about some hair mistakes. Oh, and if you're not new to this, can we talk about the fact that this is actually episode 26? Yeah, 26 in this series. Okay, I'm not gonna lie, I really didn't think it was actually gonna go to 26. I feel like that's a lot. So, quick question. Do you want to see a recap? Like, should I follow up with some of the people that we've already kind of shown on here and talk to them about if they're not, they decided to actually take my suggestions? And if so, how it turned out for them? I think we should do that. I also think we should put this in seasons so that we can actually make that a little easier. Sound good? What do you think? Comment below. Let me know if you want to see a recap. Okay, this camera is so heavy. Okay, so before we dive into some mistakes, should we meet this week's model? Yes. Now, while I throw the pictures up on the screen and then I go through Mary Lee's email, you know what to do if you've been around. Go ahead and comment below. Let me know what you think we should do. Okay, now with that said, let me introduce you to Mary Lee. Now, first of all, Mary Lee, thank you so much for putting yourself out there and being a part of this series. I truly appreciate it. And here is the email that Mary Lee sent to me. Justin, I need your help desperately. I'm 65 and wanting a younger look. I'm wondering if you could suggest some hairstyles, like a perm, highlights, or maybe a cut. Not too short, as I like to wear it up for the summer. I have fine, thin hair. Thank you for any suggestions. So now that we know what's kind of leading my suggestions, let's dive into the mistakes. Okay, so mistake number one actually deals with the length. And the fact is, the length is just a little bit too long. And I know, wait, Justin, she said in her email, if you listened, that she doesn't want to go short. I absolutely understand, and I don't want her to have shorter hair than she feels comfortable in. I ultimately want Mary Lee to have the length that she desires. But here's the thing, as you can see at the bottom right here, it's a little bit too thin for the length. And if you remember in her email, she also said that her hair is on the thinner, finer side. That means that whatever the length is, we want that to be as strong and as dense as possible to make the overall shape and her hair texture in general look denser. Now here's the good news to all this. Most of that thinness at the bottom isn't actually created by her length or her hair texture. In part it is, but more than that, it's actually created by the specific way it is being layered. So, with that said, that actually takes us on to mistake number two. Okay, so mistake number two is actually that it's layered too much at the bottom. This is something that happens actually all the time, and I've actually done videos specifically showing you how to avoid these kinds of layers and how to layer hair so that you don't have this concern. So I'll go ahead if you want to check those out and link those in the description below. But essentially, and this is a very blanket statement here, but essentially what happens is you have the recession to your occipital bone, this bump in the back of your head. And all of that hair below that line, all of this hair, essentially, for lack of a better explanation, should basically be one length. Not in every situation, but in longer hair. If it's closer to one length and not really layered, it'll have a lot more of a tendency to look thicker at the bottom. So in reality, what we're doing in this situation is backing up to go forward. We ultimately want to land back in a few months where we are now, but allow that to be more one length at the bottom and therefore look denser and thicker. So just having layers down there is kind of currently what's causing mistake number two. Now with that said, let's dive into mistake number three. Okay, now mistake number three is actually that the top layers are too long. Okay, I know, I'm all over the board, it probably seems like. If you're new, you're probably wondering, who is this guy even telling me this right now? He's backwards. Okay, so follow me here, let me explain. So you can still have layers, right? I said everything below that ridge should be basically one length in the back, but everything above it up here can still have layers, and that's actually how we create shape. This is why I say that people with thin or fine hair can be layered and still have a very dense overall look. And in reality, it can actually create more volume in the right areas, lighten the shape up, and get even a denser look. So yes, layers do work, they just need to be done right. In this particular situation, Mary Lee's got layers on the top that are a little bit on the longer side, and in fact they're so long that they're actually kind of giving her all the detriments, meaning she still has to style those ends and make those layers look good, but they're not really giving her any of the benefits, which is lightening the shape up and giving volume where we want to see volume and all of the good stuff. So mistake number 3 is having layers kind of work against you, I guess. There we go. Now let's move on to mistake number 4. 4 that many. 4. Okay, mistake number 4 really actually isn't a mistake. It just are some points or questions that Mary Lee had in her email. So I want to go over those, and that just dealt with what my ideas were for as far as highlights go, or even a perm. So I want to address all of those, but before we dive into that, why don't we dive into the suggestions again and see what they would actually look like on Mary Lee if she took my suggestions, and then we'll dive into all of the other stuff kind of near the curveball. All right? But also, let's change backgrounds because I get bored. That is pretty though, and it doesn't suck. All right, fair enough. Let's move on. Okay, so the first 2 mistakes were really dealing with the length and the layers, or the over amount of layering at the very bottom. So if we brought that length up a little bit to kind of take away some of that layering, this is what that would look like. Now, as you can see here, just taking that length up a little bit goes a long way in making the rest of the overall shape look a lot thicker. It really is the situation of backing up to go forward. And I can tell you that as this length grows out, it's going to continue to look much denser than it did when it was layered. Now, the other thing you might notice here is that from the very front, there really doesn't look like there's much length that was removed. However, when you get to the profile, you can see in the back, there's actually quite a bit more length. And this is a good thing because it means that if you're in the situation and you've got layering in the front, many times you don't really have to take off that much length out of the actual front. But if you bring that length up in the back, the line and everything still works, but it actually takes off those layers and looks a lot denser. So when you look in the mirror, you don't really feel that much shorter. You're only going to feel shorter when you actually reach behind your head to grab your hair, or when you're shampooing your hair in the shower. So that is kind of a bonus. Okay, now mistake number 3 was about the top layers being a little bit too long, and it's really just adding a lot of weight and kind of pulling everything down. So if we were to lighten those layers up a bit, this is what that would look like. Now, admittedly, I have to say this is really hard to show in Photoshop to kind of give you the idea of really what it would look like. It would really look much better in person. You get a lot more movement and texture that I just can't show you visually in this format. However, you might notice that this isn't really a huge shift, and that's actually kind of part of the point. Many times, and I've said this so many times, it's not one thing that makes a massive change. It's a lot of little things, and a lot of those little shifts create a large impact. That, to me, is exactly what's happening here. It's not a big shift in the overall look, but it creates a large impact in the fact that it's creating volume more where we want to see volume and giving it a little bit more of a youthful feel. So, yes. Now, with that said, let's jump into the questions that Mary Lee had about highlights and perms. So let's do that now. Okay, so highlights can definitely give her hair a little bit more dimension and movement. So if we did add highlights into this particular shape in a kind of similar fashion to what it looks like she's had in the past, this is basically what that would look like. We added a little bit of a bang in here, but it's not a thick, heavy bang. She could do a thicker bangs. I would just make sure that they were not too square across to help mitigate any concern of her face shape looking too square or too rectangular. But I prefer this little bit of a swept off kind of bang because I think it does both give us the benefit of having some softness and kind of the look of a bang to break up her face a little bit more, but at the same time doesn't close her off too much. Now, like I said, this is a good option to give the hair a little bit more dimension, but if I'm completely honest, I think I have some better ideas coming up, so stick around. But before we show you that, let's talk about perms really quick. Okay, so I've got a lot to unpack here when it comes to perms, so kind of stick with me if you will. Now, I don't think perms are a bad thing. However, there is something that if you're thinking about getting a perm, you need to understand. And that is that perms, 9 out of 10 times, are not going to really look all that natural. And the main reason for that is if you look at a natural head of curly hair, what you're going to see is even though it may have the same amount of curl all over the head, each individual curl is going to be slightly different because it's natural. However, when you do a perm, you're wrapping your hair around plastic rods, and each plastic rod you wrap it around, each curl is going to be exactly the same. So what people will do to mitigate this concern is they'll use different size of rods. They'll put medium rods in one head along with some large rods, or maybe even some small rods thrown in there just to kind of change up the curl so it doesn't all look exactly the same. The problem with that is, while it does give you different amounts of curl in different areas, each individual rod does not contract or expand. So every time you wrap hair around that, every large rod that's in the head is going to give you the exact same amount of curl as the next large rod. So again, even though there's a difference in the amount of curl, it's not quite as natural looking as natural hair. Imagine that. Now with that said, there are different methods to doing perms. So there are ways to get a more natural look. But 9 out of 10 times, people are going to use rods, and that just isn't going to give that look. The other thing that you want to take into consideration is many times perming your hair and coloring it, depending on what kind of color you're doing, can be very hard on your hair. I would say use a flat iron or a curling iron to create that volume or wave, and then do the color. Now, we also have to understand that the other reason that people many times will do a perm is because they feel like it's going to be less maintenance. They get that wave in their hair that they were previously creating with a curling iron or a flat iron, and therefore they just have to let it air dry and they're good to go. And in some situations that may be true, but in many situations it's not true, and especially if you're doing color like highlights or any color that is hard on your hair. Even though you're doing this perm to spend less time on your hair, you might find yourself in a situation where your hair is so damaged that you actually have to spend more time on it with the diffuser and products to get it to lay smooth and look the way that you want it to look. Does that make sense? Okay, so with that said, let's dive into the curveball. Let me tell you, it just got very sunny and bright out here all of a sudden. Alrighty, I love the sun, so that's not a bad thing. Okay, now let's talk about the curveball. Now, in this curveball, since Mary Lee did say that she did not want to go shorter, I wanted to show her a shape that I thought would look great at roughly the length that it is now, so she can still pull her hair back, and also show her a couple of different ideas for when it comes to color. So for the first idea, this is something that I think would look great on you, Mary Lee. Now, as you can see, this bit of wave adds a bit of dimension to the overall shape, as well as still has the length needed to pull her hair back like she wants to do. In this idea, when it comes to color, we went more with kind of an ombre color where the roots are darker and it gets lighter towards the ends. I like this because it both gives her some lightness, with still leaning into depth at the roots to help her add more dimension, as well as to make her hair look denser. Now, the other great thing is these types of color grow out really well as they rely on a certain amount of kind of grow out look to begin with. So it works really well in terms of maintenance. But let's move on to my next idea, and let's switch this color up a little bit. Now in this one, we're keeping the same shape for the cut, but we want a completely different direction with the color. Obviously. I really like this sort of kind of chocolate brown color with highlights because I really think it adds a lot of depth to her skin tone, and I really think it makes her eyes pop. Now, I recognize that this is an entirely different color direction than she was going in the past, and probably not at all what she was referring to when she said highlights, as the whole thing is a little bit on the darker side. But I did want to show this to Mary Lee, as well as to you, just to kind of throw a different idea out there. Think if she moved in the direction of highlights, specifically lighter color, then I would move more towards an ombre, which again, like I said, would allow it to get a lot lighter and still not look too stripy and or create too much more of a grow out concern. But if she's just open to color in general, really, if you are, I really think this chocolate kind of dimensional look would kill it on you. But let you guys know that I'm always curious to hear what you think. So ignore me and tell me below, what do you think Mary Lee should do? You think she should go light, dark, something completely different? That's definitely an option as well. I don't know. Tell me. Let me know below. And otherwise, you go down there, let me know what you think that Mary Lee should do, and I am going to go ahead and enjoy that view. That rhymed, and I didn't even try to make it rhyme. That just rhymed because I'm like a rapper. Didn't even know. I have to go, as you can tell. But thank you for hanging out. You have a good one. That view doesn't suck. We'll see you soon. Bye.